Namaskar. Hello and welcome to the reading of Agastya, Purpose of Life from the Sacred Discourses of Agastya Valipadu. Today we have a very interesting topic that Sage Agastya has given us. It's called Pride and Ego. So we shall begin. Sage Agastya says, some of the most frequently used words that I hear in the world are me, because of me, mine, and ours. It is the ego that is within each man that prompts him to utter such words. This is called pride. Pride is different from ego. Intellectual faculty is what one has learned. A child learns intelligence and behavior based on instructions, advice, and discipline it receives from those that rear it. The lessons that are learned by a growing child depend on the type of lesson and the person who is teaching it. That is how its intellect develops. Man learns through the people around him, through the town he lives in, and through the country. So, Appa is now giving a small introduction on what pride and ego are. Pride, if we understand, is basically something that is connected with short-term material achievements, or having something, being proud of having a car, being proud of winning a certificate or a medal. Ego is much more deeply ingrained in us because it stems from our intellect. And Appa says that intellect is basically from what we have learned in our life. So he's now giving us a foundation of what comprises of ego. So he says, when you hear people say that, me, because of me, this has happened, because of me, this is going on, without me, nothing is going to, this whole world will fall apart. That is the attitude we all have, without even realizing how much of pride and ego is hidden in our own self. And for a spiritual aspirants, ego can be the greatest pitfall. That's what they call spiritual ego, because when you have ego, there is no way you can, expand in your consciousness, because you're so tied down to that one form or body that you identify as yourself. You're not looking at the soul, but you're looking at the form, the name, the body, and your structure or place in society. All these form what is called ego. It kind of makes you identify with this very temporary form. Because if you think about it, we understand that as souls, we reincarnate over and over again. So today I might be Indian. Tomorrow I might, next birth I could be a African American or African or a Chinese or a Japanese. But how much of our ego is built into the identification of what we are now based on our nationality, our race, our creed, our language, the society we live in, the family we are brought up in, our social status, everything dictates how we consider ourselves, how we identify ourselves. So Appa says, pride is different from ego. So intellectual faculty is what one has learned. And that is what we are talking about now. We learn about who we are, or learn to identify ourselves based on the instructions and the environment we have received in our childhood. That's how it all begins. You're born to a certain family, whether they're rich or poor, everything starts dictating how you identify yourself. So if you look back, the parents, what they teach the child, creates or forms what the child is going to be when it becomes an adult. So if you look a little more deeper, when we are born or attracted, the soul gets attracted to the set of parents who have the same kind of intellectual and characteristical traits that we need in order to fulfill our karma and live to the extent of what desires and karma we want to fulfill in that particular lifetime. So that is why when we're talking about couples having children, there's always this thing: try to be more spiritual when you're going to planning a family, because how you are at the time of conceiving the child, it also dictates what kind of soul comes into your family. So we choose the kind of family, the society, the area that we're going to live in because we want to fulfill our karma, and that kind of environment gives us the best opportunity to do that. So as parents, when we start learning from children start learning from parents, then they're already learning what is going to dictate how they are going to live in this life. So that's why child rearing becomes such an important factor in today's society, which unfortunately has completely been lost in the modern world. Then Appa says, this is, the lessons that are learned by a growing child depend on the type of lesson and the person who is teaching it. How many parents actually spend time with children nowadays? Rarely. Most of the children you see are, either watching TV or they're already with, mobile phones or electronic devices. That creative element is slowly disappearing in today's children. But very few parents are totally involved in bringing up their children. In America, we have a lot of instances where mothers leave their children in their house, like 2 or 3-year-old child alone for 10 days, maybe a week, or just because they want to go on a vacation or a party, and they come back to find the child dead. That is how bad our whole system has become. Humanity is going to that kind of a stage. And that is why Valipadu becomes very important in this current modern society, because Appa starts teaching us about every small thing that is important for mankind. Then he says, there is a link between being intellectual and having pride. When one develops intellect, they feel that they're better than someone else. It is then that intellect and pride combine to create the sense of ego. It is when ego is expressed that one's true state of mind can be seen. Now, these are very important words because Appa is very clearly identifying. When you connect intellect and pride, then you're creating the ego of how a man perceives himself. So when a man expresses himself, then you understand what kind of vritti he has. Is he full of tamoguna or rajas, or he's sattvic? His expression is what is action, his thoughts, his words help you identify what kind of a person he is. Because ego is the one that shows the world what you are within. Because you cannot hide it. No matter how hard you try, that sense of ego that has developed in you, the sense of identification of the society, the family, your social status, your economic status, and even your intellectual pride or spiritual ego, all that form what you identify yourself as ego or yourself. And that is what is going to come out every time you interact with society. Appa says, when one feels that the knowledge is higher than others, you will see pride in residence in such a person. So we see that a lot. We see a lot of people, especially, scholars, have this attitude because they've, read a lot of books, because they're able to quote a lot of verses or instances or recall, dates and times in history or people. They think they are very knowledgeable. They disregard the spirituality that can be found in a peasant. They disregard the spirituality that can be found in a householder, because they think what they know is the ultimate, because they're basing it on facts. But remember what Appa has said before, all this is temporal knowledge. What you learn through history and through facts and through science is temporal knowledge. True knowledge comes from within. And that is what we as spiritual aspirants should be looking at. Then Appa says, what is learnt in a lifetime is only a handful, said the wise Avayar. He is now talking about the 12th century woman poet. She used to just go around, walking around in the country, spending time with villagers, and compose these beautiful, beautiful, in-depth philosophical lines, which are even today quoted and remembered all over the world. And that great mother, Avayar, she said, what one has learned in a lifetime is only a handful. So it behooves each one of us to remember this, because no matter, you could go spend your whole lifetime in a library, no matter, you can go listen to a lot of lectures from the greatest of gurus all your lifetime, but it is still just a handful. Why is it? Because it is all temporal knowledge. It is knowledge that has been learnt externally through the mind. It is very intellectual in nature. There is a limit to intellectual knowledge. If you ask a truly spiritual person a question at any time, he is able to give you a good response. But you ask an intellectual person, the only answer he can give is based on what he has learned, because he is not connected to the supreme knowledge, which is all pervading. Supreme knowledge, like cosmic energy, is all pervading, and the person who's open to that as a spiritual aspirant is able to actually tap into that anytime. And that is the mark of true spirituality, not somebody who just reads something and quotes those lines. Then he says, the person who understands this will rip out the sense of ego and discard it. He will remain humble. It is only then that man has an opportunity to understand superior knowledge in stages. Now let's go back and read this again. What is learned in a lifetime is only a handful, said the wise Avayar. If you examine the meaning behind this, you will realize that what is one learned using intellectual faculties is merely a handful when compared to the all-pervading knowledge that the Supreme Being has given to the world. The person who understands this will rip out the sense of ego and discard it. He will remain humble. It is only then that man has the opportunity to understand superior knowledge in stages. Now, this is what we have to pay attention to. The true mark of spirituality is a person without the idea of me, mine, because of me. That is why when Brother Pedro of the Sage Agastya Jnanapeetham in Thailand says, if somebody says this is the only way, then it's a red flag for me. And that is true. There is no single path to God. There is no single religion to God. All are valid. Everything is valid. But only a true spiritual aspirant knows that. A true spiritual aspirant knows that, and he expresses it by being open. Like the Vedas says, let all knowledge come to us from all sides. What is it? Very basic thing that is saying is knowledge is all prevalent. It is all over. It is through the Gita, through the Quran, through the Bible. It doesn't matter. It all comes to us because the source is the same. So a true spiritual person will not say Hinduism is better or Christianity is better or Islam is better. They will not say that because they know that the absolute is all pervading. It is that knowledge of the absolute that has been received by great people like Muhammad or Christ or Buddha or anyone else and given to the world. And it all comes from the same source. So if we know that, such a true guru or such a true spiritual man no longer has the feeling of ego because he knows without this body, this body without this superior knowledge is nothing. Without the connection to the divine knowledge or superior knowledge, this body is nothing. So when somebody praises you and says, oh, you have great knowledge, then remember that great knowledge comes from knowledge that is all prevalent. It is not specific only to each one of us. And we would be nothing. We, the ego, would be nothing without tapping into that great knowledge. And the one who actually goes to the stage where he realizes that he is part of that great knowledge, that is a liberated being. That is the perfected being, because the entire knowledge of creation is within him. And that is what I am trying to bring forth through the Sri Agastishwara Panchakshari Mahamantra Sat Chakra Yoga Sadhana, where we are bringing together the power of those two mantras, the connection of the primordial 5 primeval elements to the chakras, to understand that consciousness and everything that we are looking outside through our senses is within us. The soul is this body, mind and ego that's all part of that all-pervading absolute. So that is what puts a spiritual aspirant apart from other people, because we begin to understand that we are all part of the same consciousness. Even if it is a simple, humble person living in a mountain, in a small village, or a great scholar or a scientist, we all belong, all knowledge belongs to that supreme being, which we are part of, and it's all pervading. He who claims he is the only wise one will soon lose respect for his speech. And we know that, because whether in the very local level or a very materialistic level, if you see in an office setting, the most unpopular person is one who has all the answers. I have been part of that. There was a time when I was constantly, I knew it. But now I realize that is wrong. Because even if you know it, don't express it that you know it. That knowledge is prevalent, it is there. If necessary and the time comes, share it, then let it go. Don't get attached to the idea that you know it, because that is where pride and ego comes in, and that's where you fall. So the most unpopular person in the office or in a group is a person who has all the answers, who's the know-it-all, and he says, I know it, nobody else does. But the person who's really, truly knowledgeable doesn't say that, doesn't express it. So such a person is our sister Geeta Shetty. She is like a flower. She's so quiet, so beautiful. And when she speaks, you see that in her. She's humble. She has not a single bad thing to say about anybody else. No matter how bad the situation, she always finds something nice to say. And that comes out of deep understanding that all are souls, that even our fallen brothers and sisters are souls. So let us continue with what Appa is saying. It is only then that man has an opportunity to understand superior knowledge and status. He who claims he is the only one will soon lose respect for his speech. Just like the word me, mine is also a word that denotes pride, me is a word that is a symptom of pride. So just like the word me, mine is also a word that denotes pride. So when we say, this is my family, this is my car, this is my house, this is my knowledge, then it denotes pride. Me is a word of the symptom of that pride. Mine is a word that is also subject to pride. However, it refers to one's possession. Now, Appa is distinguishing between intellectual egoism and pride to materialistic egoism. What do we refer to as mine? Mine is everything that is material, that is tangible, whether it's family or material possessions. So Appa says, mine is a word that is also subject to pride. However, it refers to one's possession. When one refers to their child, wife, or father, it is a figure of speech that shows the connection between oneself and one's family. That kind of self-identification is correct. Appa says that's okay. When you say this is my husband, my family, that's okay, but that is required in this current world, to identify each one of us. When one refers to one's home, one's clothing, one's vehicle, the person is referring to what one possesses. That is also not wrong. Appa says even that is not wrong. So mine, when we use it as, but then we have to understand the deeper context of this. Mine, when we use it as a term of identification, is okay. Mine, when it comes to a term of using it as being better than someone else in comparison to someone else, then it becomes bad. Mine, when it becomes a very possessive thing, then it is in the danger of becoming bad. Why? Let us think about two lovers, two people who love each other. The man loves the woman. At one point, she says, no, I don't want to be part of this. I'm going to go away. He cannot let go of it because at that point, she has become his possession, mine. Then he doesn't want anybody else to have it. Then he tries to destroy her or destroy the person who's probably going to get her. So that's a very crude example of how these things can be both right and wrong. But what a spiritual aspirant uses is discrimination. When you identify something as me and myself or mine for the sake of identification, for the sake of relevance to a certain thing that you're expressing, that is okay, Appa says. But when it becomes something that comes because of arrogance, because of a superiority complex, because it is something you're trying to show that you're better than somebody else, that your family is better than something else, then it comes from a deeper, bad or negative state, which stems from pride, arrogance, that kind of things. So let's continue with what Appa is talking about. It is only when one talks about oneself or one's family or one's material to show off and compares oneself to another, then it becomes pride. And that is what we were just talking about. I should have read that before explaining, but that is what we are talking about. Only when we are comparing it to somebody else, then it gets the negative connotation. In that case, the sense of ego turns to pride. So that ego, the identification turns to pride. So now you're making a very clear distinction between what is used as identification, what becomes a negative state of identification when it is compared to others. Now let's continue with what Appa says. Where there is pride, humility lessens. Arrogance becomes stronger. Arrogance leads to jealousy. Jealousy leads to fights. That is when peace flees. The one who takes pride in arrogance will finally lose. Arrogance will definitely lead to downfall. Nobody could express this other than Appa Agastya, because think about a human being trying to express this whole concept in one paragraph, in a few sentences. Amazing. Where there is pride, humility listens. Yes, what happens? Pride comes, your humility listens. Arrogance becomes stronger. You become more arrogant. Arrogance leads to jealousy. Because you're arrogant, then there is jealousy from others. You also feel jealous about others who you feel when you compare yourself to somebody else that better than you. You don't want to say it, but inside you're feeling that. Jealousy leads to fights. And what does that happen? It leads to fights. People start fighting with each other because even if they don't express that they're jealous about a certain thing, it comes out. It comes out in their speech, it comes out in their attitude, it comes out in their interaction. So always remember, when there's a lot of fighting going on between two people, it is ego-driven. It's ego-driven because of comparison. And that is what Appa is saying here. Where there is pride, humility lessens. Arrogance becomes stronger. Arrogance leads to jealousy. Jealousy leads to fight. That is when peace flees. And when all this happens, what happens? You lose the peace of mind. Look at it. One thing leads to another, and you lose peace of mind. So how important does it become for spiritual aspirants to begin to discriminate our own behavior and thought in terms of Ego in comparison to others, ego as identification for the sake of the material world, in terms of putting something in context, in putting something in relation to. So when somebody is full of pride and has arrogance and about certain things, it always leads to fights, and then that person no longer has peace. Like, there are two neighbors. One builds a home and they're very, very happy and proud about it. Somebody else builds a home. It's better than their home. So they start building something else. And then at one point, neither of them can build anything more. Then they start fighting. And what used to be a haven of peace in each home now has become a conflict because they're fighting because of jealousy. And that can be applied to every aspect of a life. At work, at home, at a competition. And that is why I do not like competitions when they have all these competitions of sports activities. Well, it's wonderful to have sports and stuff. Competition ultimately means that one person is superior and everybody else is lost. There's never a loser in spirituality, in life. Everybody is experiencing and expressing. Everybody wins because we are always better off because of what we have learned in a particular lifetime than we were in the previous lifetime. So we must always look at it like this, that we are changing, we are becoming better lifetime after lifetime. And that is what a spiritual person begins to understand when he looks at everything in context of this, in all spheres of life. Then Appa says, that is why one must always remember that what one has learned is only a handful. Acknowledging that what one does not know is vast as an ocean, one must decide to what extent information about oneself should be shared with others. Now, this is very important. How many of us are guilty of volunteering information? We all do that, right? Even before somebody asks you something, you want to say something about yourself, about the knowledge you have. You want to show off. How many times when you hear somebody talk, you realize they're talking because they are trying to show off their knowledge. And most of this knowledge is temporal knowledge. It is not supreme knowledge. It is not knowledge that is coming from within. And then think of another person. You just have one question. And immediately they launch off with a big lecture on that particular topic. And you're like, okay, I just asked one question. There is no conversation there. There again, ego has come in. Even the person may not even be aware of what they're doing. So let us be careful as spiritual aspirants that we do not volunteer information unless somebody asks, and only to the extent that is needed. It's like, this old age adage that says, don't throw pearls in front of a swine. It's not going to know the difference. So why do you want to throw beautiful knowledge in front of people who are not willing to listen, who are not open to it, who might perceive this as something that you're trying to show off and get more angry with you, maybe more upset with you? Just let it go. So like we talked about last time, and Brother Ramachandran so succinctly put it, be calm, be silent as much as possible. That brings you to peace. Just be patient, be calm in any kind of situation. And Sister Veena is somebody who's always counseling me about these things. Many times if I get agitated despite all this knowledge, then she says, Anu, don't do anything quickly. Wait for some time. This too will pass. So, that is why I say in Vadipadu, we are all learning from each other. None of us are teachers. We are all teachers in one sense, and we are all students in one sense. So that is why, all of us here in this group, Tarumarasan one day actually sent me a message that I needed so badly. So like that, each one of us are helping each other, and it's Appa who's guiding all of us. So as spiritual aspirants, we must understand that supreme knowledge is all pervading. It comes from within. And when that knowledge comes, there is no doubt in you. You may have to, like, for example, right now, I get a lot of information about mantras or some specific chakras and stuff. And I have never paid much attention to those things in my life, but I do look it up on internet only to confirm. But once I confirm, okay, I know, okay, this is true, this is correct. So superior knowledge will usually, without any doubt, certain things that happen in your life, is the truth. You don't even have to ask anybody else, because it is the truth, and that comes from within. That is superior knowledge. That is how we identify it. So that is why Appa says, that is why one must always remember that what one has learned is only a handful. Acknowledging that what one does not know is as vast as an ocean, one must decide to what extent information about oneself must be shared with others. So, with that, let us close this topic, because next week we're going to talk about a specific, example that Appa gives about all this. So, we don't want to dilute this topic with that. But so let's go back today and start reflecting on how we are identifying ourselves. Are we identifying ourselves in comparison to others, which many of us do at certain times? Or are we identifying ourselves in terms of showing a relevance or a relation to, or in terms of, being part of a society or a family or a workforce? And let us learn to see what we express, whether it comes from the idea of pride and ego, or does it come from true in-depth knowledge, which might be useful at that particular time to the other person who's talking about it? And let us stop when it's necessary. Let us continue to understand all these things, discriminate, and live a life as true spiritual aspirants, accepting everybody as equal, accepting all knowledge that is pervading in this world as equal, and not saying mine is superior, my religion is superior, or my knowledge is superior, or this is the only path. There is a lot of paths. Like, just as there are billions of people in the world, every human being has a different need, different level of understanding, and there is a path for each such person. So we must be respectful towards everything. With this, I'll chant Om Namo Agastya, and will thank him for this great knowledge, and we will meet next week. Om Shri Agastishwaraya Namaha.